What gets in the way of vulnerability?
Comparison is the thief of joy.
It's this fear of fear.
The inability to enjoy our own life
Uncertainty can also be
if we're constantly comparing it to the perceived life of others.
a major barrier to vulnerability.
Like comparing our everyday life to everyone else's Instagram life.
Hey there, I'm Reverend Dan. We are Soul Evolution Collaborative, a nonprofit based in universal spiritual principles, offering possibilities for navigating the evolution of life in an authentic and intentional way. And this is Truth Be Told 2.0, a weekly series that is changing the norms, bringing you inspiring and uplifting messages to look at life a little differently. And so this is week 2 of our series on vulnerability and why it's probably not what you think, or at least it's not what many of us were taught to think about it. And so today we are going to take a look at what gets in the way of vulnerability. Honestly, there are a lot of things that can get in the way here, but we're going to check out the top 3 things that arise when we set the intention of living life from a more vulnerable and authentic space: fear, uncertainty, and comparison. It seems the prevailing wisdom of the past has been to resist, maybe even push back against these things. But today, we're going to explore the possibilities of leaning into these experiences, maybe even befriending them. And I think we'll find that what might have seemed like limitations and roadblocks in the past, those cracks and canyons that we have kind of tried to walk around, that these are actually our guides towards a greater self-awareness and connection. So let's sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of Truth Be Told 2.0.
Theodore Roosevelt is quoted as saying, "Comparison is the thief of joy." So what does that mean? For me, it speaks to the inability to enjoy our own life if we're constantly comparing it to the perceived life of others. Like comparing our everyday life to everyone else's Instagram life. The Instagram life is all filtered and packaged for maximum effect. We all know that life doesn't show up this way. At least mine doesn't, but I suspect I'm not alone in this. When we allow comparison to be the guiding force in our lives, it impacts our capacity for vulnerability. We may be unwilling to take risks or step out and reveal our true selves for fear of not being as good or capable as someone else. Our instinct is often to take stock of all the people in a room and then gauge our own self-expression based on how we rank ourselves in comparison to everyone else. It doesn't take much to see that this can greatly impact our willingness or our ability to show up just as we are. We may want to blend in or not be too much, whatever that may mean in any given situation. This instinct or conditioned response may have us holding back or playing small. And so the opportunity exists to look at those areas where we are comparing ourselves to others or playing small and begin to explore how we can use vulnerability to harness the magnificence of our authentic selves. Now, choosing to be vulnerable enough to express our authentic selves is not always easy. However, the choice becomes whether or not we allow ourselves to be limited by the experiences that attempt to stand in the way, or to look them in the face and move anyway. Now, Rumi said, "Move, but don't move the way fear makes you move." And so I would add that to say, for our purposes, move, but don't move the way comparison makes you move. Shifting our perspective and our tendency to compare ourselves to others can be challenging. Our brains are wired to compare and categorize. So instead of removing the tendency to compare from our experience, which, by the way, is impossible, the goal is to begin to shift our reactions to these comparisons when they show up in our brains, allowing them to be just what they are: thoughts. and then showing up and moving in ways that are in alignment with who we are. An often forgotten truth in these conversations about vulnerability is that there are many in our world for whom being vulnerable is challenging and sometimes unsafe. Comparison in these situations is not just an individual construct, but one that has been literally woven into the very frameworks of our society and the systems of our society. So this is the work. This is our call to action. Understanding that comparison and all the fear and uncertainty that may come with it are not things to be avoided or ignored or suppressed. Instead, their presence becomes a beacon, a microscope that we can look at our lives with. And then we can really, with that close-up view, begin to do the work of removing the barriers to vulnerability, and then truly living the life that we were all born to live.
So several months back, we launched Socially Engaged Conversations, which is a monthly event. It's the first Friday of every month, and it is designed to intentionally bridge this us versus them divide, get rid of us and them, and step into a we mentality. And so our theme this month for April is trans rights are human rights. And this feels like such an important topic in general, but especially right now. You can sign up on our website. Just go to events, and there it is. There'll be a link for you to go and sign up. It has been hugely transformative, and I think this is just such a topical conversation this month. While you're here, remember to hit like, subscribe, maybe even drop a comment. We would love to hear from you, and thanks for watching. What gets in the way of vulnerability? We just heard a bit about comparison, so now let's take a look at the next two biggies, fear and uncertainty. Fear can be a super powerful barrier to, well, a lot of things, but especially vulnerability. But it's not just fear, it's this fear of fear. This fear that we as society have accumulated around fear, that any time the word fear comes up, we turn away from fear. And it has turned into what I think is a fear of fear. We are afraid of being afraid because you're not supposed to be fearful, right? This is the American way. We don't do fear. And this fear can be, because it does exist and we all do have it to some extent, this fear may be experienced in different ways for different people, right? And maybe it's the fear of what others think. Maybe it's fear of trying something new. Maybe it's fear of rejection. Maybe it's fear of not feeling good enough. For some, it is this societal construct that really contributes to fear, and it impacts our ability to feel like we can be vulnerable. And really, this is the shoulds. Right? You should do this. You should be this. You should be here. You should have a job, should have a house, should have a family, should. All of the things that life should look like because society says so. And if your life doesn't look like all of those things, well, what does that construct say? It says you're doing it wrong. You should be doing it differently. And so we have potential fear around the shoulds. And often there is this underlying shame and blame game that gets played. We shame ourselves, we blame others, and that also keeps us fearful of. God forbid someone else knows our shame, knows that we have shame, or sees it. And so a lot of times we hide that shame, or we point blame at others, and fear keeps us from being vulnerable, from allowing ourselves to be vulnerable enough to have that the sharing of ourselves, to be in connection with other people, to really connect in meaningful relationships. And so this is where we can actually begin to flip the script on fear and our societal fear of fear. If or when we are willing to step into and look at that shame, that blame game that goes on, fear gets to be this great neon sign that is pointing us towards our next step, the next thing for us to know. So maybe it's not always comfortable. I mean, I think that's certainly important to realize. A fear, stepping into fear, taking that next step, not always comfortable, but definitely a powerful experience when we are willing to embrace what we're fearful of. And so fear can actually shed light on these areas, right? It can invite us to take a closer look at the areas that we have fear around, or those areas that society, our communities have fear around, these areas where changes are needed. So fear points to areas that need attention, areas that potentially need change. Fear becomes a guide, like arrows pointing the way towards our growth edge, or fear can be the invitation to step out of our comfort zone and do the next thing. Whatever the cause, our fear is pointing us towards something to know about ourselves. And so much like fear, uncertainty can also be a major barrier to vulnerability. We absolutely love certainty. And I think often the thought or the hint of uncertainty stops us in our tracks. Whether we are waiting for the details of a very finely laid out plan, which would obviously happen in the way that it was planned out, or we're simply waiting for the confidence to just do the thing, uncertainty can have this strange and often unrecognized power over us. And it keeps us not only from doing the next thing, but certainly can keep us from allowing ourselves to be vulnerable enough to engage again in meaningful relationships and connection. The ironic thing here is that most of the time, the people who are most equipped to do the thing, whatever the thing is, are the ones with the most doubt about it, the least amount of confidence. And the people who are often the least equipped to do that same thing often feel the most confident about it. So it's kind of like when you know too much about something, it makes it harder to do. And so here's the deal. There is risk involved in vulnerability. And we talked about that last week. There is emotional risk involved. And so vulnerability requires us to become friends with uncertainty. There is this invitation to become so familiar with yourself that you stop looking outside of yourself for confidence and reassurance. You know yourself so well that internally is the confidence, internally is the validation, internally is the thing that says yes. And so we can become friends with uncertainty because we can have confidence and still not know what's going to happen. We can be confident and take the risk. Uncertainty is part of wholeness. So we have the choice of seeing it as a barrier or seeing it as an opportunity. And we can meet it with curiosity. Opportunity, it is this opportunity to embrace our values, right? Uncertainty, embracing uncertainty is this opportunity to embrace our values, to move with intention, right? Intention provides courage, courage provides confidence, and courage and confidence allow us to embrace new experiences. So when uncertainty encourages us to take the longer, safer route to avoid having to do the new thing, we have another choice. We can view this new opportunity not at face value for what we've been told that it looks like or what we've been told to look for, but as a means of becoming even more familiar with ourselves, our values, our comfort zone. And so we can intentionally make the choice to boldly embrace new experience.